Hey, what's up, humans? Welcome back to the reading of the Let's Read for Mass Effect Revelation. I'm your host, Widow Nebula, and today we'll be going over chapters 10 and 11. We finished up Mass Effect, so here we are, continuing the reading and gonna get into the comics here after this book. And this is all before we even start Mass Effect 2. So this story that we've been reading is essentially the prequel to the trilogy. It follows around Captain Anderson as Lieutenant Commander Anderson before and during when he met Saren for the first time. So we've already met Saren in the book, and we're going to literally keep going because we got to know this story. So sorry if in the background you hear some crunching. My dog is gnawing on a bone. And sorry about how, unorganized my channel is so far. I'm just getting into this, guys. Come on. Cut me some slack. I have a full-time job. This is fun. It's supposed to be fun anyway. And it is fun. It's fun to read for you guys and play games. I got more stuff coming up for the channel itself because I'm not just going to be doing this stuff. I want to branch out and make different kinds of videos. I'm thinking about list videos or reviews and, my impressions, or even just like videos on games I like or dislike, or systems I like and dislike, little things, just building and building and building on top of this channel. So we will see where we go from here. But for now, we gotta get the reading done. So let's not waste any more time and let's get right into it. Chapter 10. This is a private club, Batarian, growled the Krogan security guard who stepped in Grota Iba's way as he tried to enter the doors of the sanctuary. Tonight, I'm a member, the Batarian mercenary replied, holding up his financial access card to the scanner and letting it deduct the 400 credit cover charge directly from his bank account. The Krogan didn't move, barring his way until the transaction was approved. He only took his eyes off Grota for an instant to glance at the name and ID picture that flashed up on the screen. He was checking to see if the access card had been stolen, but the ID image was clearly that of the Batarian standing before him. There was no mistaking the blue sun's tattoo emblazoned on his forehead, just above his inner left eye. It was clear from the Krogan's expression he still didn't want to move aside and let Grotto in. The cover charge only grants entrance to the club, he noted. Any services will be an additional fee. A significantly additional fee. I know how it works, Grotto spat back. I have money. The Krogan considered for a moment, hoping to find some other way to keep him out. There are no weapons inside the club. I said I know how it works, Grotto snarled. Still, the guard hesitated. The Batarian spread his arms out wide and held them in place. Just search me and get it over with. The Krogan stepped back, beaten. That won't be necessary. He tilted his head to the left, a Batarian sign of respect. My apologies, Mr. Iba. Helanda at the counter in the back can attend to your needs. Grotto lowered his arms, a little surprised. It was amazing the kind of respect money could buy. If he had actually thought it was possible to get in without being searched, he would have smuggled a pistol in under his belt, or at least slipped a knife in his boot. Instead, he slowly tilted his head to the right in acknowledgement of the apology, playing the part of a man whose honor had been insulted. He boldly walked past the doorman and into the most exclusive whorehouse on Kamala, trying to appear calm through his heart was racing. Part of him had been afraid they would simply turn him away even if he paid the cover charge. It was obvious he didn't belong here. The sanctuary was reserved for the rich and elite, those with fortunes, not soldier of fortune. For the most part, the cover fee kept men like Grotto out. There were plenty of other places on Kamala to buy companionship for the night, none of them nearly as expensive as the sanctuary. But the Blue Sun's new employer had paid a substantial fee for their exclusive services over the next few months, including a large bonus after the attack on Sedone military base. Grotto hadn't been directly involved in the attack, and he hadn't been in the warehouse when their employer had met up with Scar. If he had, he'd know who was paying them, but he might also have been one of the unlucky mercs who ended up dead at Scar's hands. The Blue Suns paid every member an equal share anyway, so Grotto hadn't missed out on anything but the chance of getting killed. And the mercs who'd been at the warehouse were still on the job. They had been contracted as personal bodyguards for the anonymous moneyman. Grotto, on the other hand, was free to go out and enjoy his share of the credits, and for once in his life, he was going to experience a pleasure reserved for those far more wealthy and powerful than he. He'd spent part of the bonus on new clothes, but even so he began to feel self-conscious as he crossed the room. He didn't fit in, and the clientele, most of them Batarians, were regarding him with open suspicion and curiosity. Societal caste was an important part of Batarian culture, and Grotto was openly defying the conventional norms. But when he noticed that even the employees were looking at him with contempt, his embarrassment transformed into self-righteous rage. Who were they to look down on him? Nothing but servants and whores. As he marched back up to the counter in the back, passing several more Krogan security personnel, he vowed he'd make somebody pay. Once he had his whore in a private room, he'd turn her scorn into fear and terror. "Welcome to this sanctuary, Mr. Iba," cooed the young Batarian woman behind the counter. "My name is Helanda." "I apologize for the incident at the door," she continued. "Odax sometimes takes his job too seriously. You have my personal assurance he will be properly respectful next time." "Good. I expect better treatment in a place like this." There wasn't going to be a next time, but Grotto wasn't going to tell her that. "We have a wide variety of services available," Helanda explained, smoothly glossing over the doorman's indiscretion and moving on to the business at hand. "The sanctuary aims to satisfy the desires of all our clientele, no matter how esoteric. If you tell me what you're interested in, I will personally help you select an appropriate consort or consorts for the evening." "I'm interested in you," he said, leaning forward on the counter, responding to the unspoken invitation. "That is not my role here," she said curtly, taking a half step back, the lids of her inner eyes flickering quickly in the distaste. He realized her charm was nothing but an act, a game she was playing with him. Her involuntary reaction exposed the truth. She felt the same revulsion he'd seen in the other employees. From the corner of his eyes, Grotto noticed one of the Krogan guards casually moving closer to them, and he decided now was not the time for retribution. He forced a laugh as if he found her stinging rejection amusing. "Actually, I'm interested in a human female." "A human female?" Helanda asked, as if she wasn't sure she had heard him properly. "I'm curious," he replied coldly. "Very well, Mr. Iba," she said, touching a button behind the counter that brought up a small screen in front of her. "I should advise you that there is a premium charge for all interspecies requests. The appropriate fees are listed beside each consort." She spun the screen to face him. The display showed several prospects, along with the allotted price for each. Grotto had to check himself to keep from choking in shock when he saw the amounts. Unlike the whorehouses he usually frequented, hourly rates weren't an option here. A full night at the sanctuary was going to cost several hundred credits, more than his entire bonus. For a brief second, he considered turning around and just walking out, but if he did, the 400 credits he'd paid at the door were gone for good. Her, he said, pointing at one of the pictures. There were less expensive options, but he was damned if they was going to let them bully him with their prices. He was never coming back here, so he was determined to get exactly what he wanted. Truthfully, he didn't know all that much about humans, but something about this individual appealed to him. She seemed fragile, vulnerable. An excellent choice, Mr. Iba. I will have someone escort you to your room for the evening. Your consort will be up shortly. A few minutes later, Grotto was alone in one of the soundproof private rooms, pacing back and forth and slamming his fist into his hand. He was thinking back on all the humiliations he had suffered since arriving at this place, working himself up into a fever, determined to take it out on the unfortunate human girl who was about to become his victim for the evening. He wasn't physically attracted to humans, female or otherwise, but this night wasn't going to be about sex. Grotto simply didn't like humans. They bred and spread like vermin, swarming out across the verge, gobbling up colony worlds and forcing out other species out like the Batarians. The humans he worked with in the Blue Suns knew how to handle themselves in a fight, but like all their kind, they were arrogant, self-important. Tonight, he would take one of that proud species and make her suffer. He would humiliate, degrade, and punish her. He would break her. There was a knock, soft and timid. He pulled open the door, reaching out to grab the woman's wrist and yank her into the room, but he froze when he saw a male Turian standing there. Who are... His words were cut off as the Turian punched him hard in the throat. Choking and gagging, Grotto staggered back and fell onto the bed in the center of the room. The Turian calmly stepped inside, closing the door behind him. Grotto heard the lock click into place, sealing the pair of them in together. Somehow scrambling to his feet, Grotto struggled to catch his breath as he brought up his fists, waiting for the Turian to move in and try to finish him off. After locking the door, however, the Turian just stood there. Who are you? Grotto finally gasped. Saren, was the one-word reply. Grotto shook his head. He didn't recognize the name. How'd you get past the guards? He demanded. They didn't try to stop me, Saren replied, his voice relaxed. I think they actually wanted me to come in here and take care of you. What? What do you mean? Grotto's voice was shaky. The unnatural calm of the Turian was unsettling. He kept his hands up, poised in case the intruder made a move. Are you really that stupid? Don't you realize they knew exactly what you had planned for tonight? They knew what you were after the moment you asked for a human consort. What are you talking about? The Turian took a single step forward. Grotto scuttled 2 steps back, his fists raised and ready. He would have retreated further, but he had reached the wall on the far end of the room. There was nowhere left to go. The sanctuary does not allow its consorts to be harmed or injured, Saren explained calmly. As he spoke, he began to slowly advance, one deliberate step at a time. They were monitoring the room. Step. The moment you laid a hand on that woman, an angry Krogan would have burst in and ripped your head off. Step. I wasn't. I didn't even do anything, the Batarian protested, finally dropping his fists. He felt like a fool waving them around when the other man seemed so calm. Step. I convinced them to let me handle it instead, Saren continued, ignoring him. They were concerned about bothering the other guests. Step. Then I reminded them that the walls are completely soundproof. Step. And you've already paid for the room. Step. The Turian was directly in front of him now, though he still appeared completely relaxed. Grotto brought his fists up again. Back up, or I'll... He never had a chance to finish the sentence, as Saren delivered a solid kick to his nether regions. Blinding bolts of furious pain shot up through Grotto's bowels and stomach. He collapsed on the ground, the agony so great he could only whimper. Saren grabbed him by the material of his newly purchased suit and yanked him back to his feet, then jabbed his thumb into one of Grotto's inner eyes, rupturing the orb and blinding him with a single blow. The Batarian fainted, lapsing into unconsciousness from the sudden shock and pain. Seconds later, he woke screaming as Saren broke his right elbow. Howling in agony, he curled up into a ball, rolling back and forth as his body experienced physical suffering beyond anything he had ever imagined. "You disgust me," Saren whispered, kneeling down to grab Grotto's left wrist. He extended the Batarian's good arm, locking out the joints, and began to apply pressure. "You wanted to torture an innocent victim for your own pleasure, you sick bastard. Torture is only useful if it has a purpose," Saren added. Those words were drowned out by the crack of Grotto's left elbow and the subsequent shrieks. Saren stepped back from the convulsing man, letting the waves of pain rack his body. It took nearly a minute for shock to set in, numbing his mangled limbs to the point where Grotto could finally speak. "You'll pay for this!" wailed up at him from the ground, sobbing freely. Tears and mucus mixed with ocular fluid from his blind eye, dribbling down into his mouth and slurring his words into a blubbery parody of a threat. "You know who I am? I'm with the Blue Suns." "Why do you think I followed you here?" A look of horror spread across Grotto's face as he finally understood. "You're a specter," he mumbled. "Please," he begged, "tell me what you want. Anything, I'll give it to you." "Information," Saren replied. "Tell me what you know about Sidon." "We were hired to take out the base," the crippled man admitted. "By who?" "I don't know. I only dealt with a go-between. I never saw him. Never heard a name." Saren sighed and knelt down on the floor beside Grotto. There were many exotic methods of interrogation, a million ways to inflict pain and punishment on a victim, but Turians were a practical people, and he personally preferred the brutal effectiveness of simple, basic techniques. Grabbing the man's dangling left arm by the wrist, he took a firm grip on one of his fingers and began to bend it backwards. "No!" the Batarian screamed. "No, please! It's the truth! That's all I know! You have to believe me!" I'm going to calm down. He stuck to the story even after 3 of the fingers on his hands were broken at the middle knuckle, convincing Saren he was telling the truth. "How did you get inside the base?" Saren asked, changing his line of questioning. "The man who hired us," Grotto muttered, his voice raw and raspy from the fresh round of screaming that had torn up his throat. "He had someone on the inside." "Give me a name." "Please," he begged in high-pitched mewling whine. "I don't know! I wasn't even there!" Saren grabbed another finger, and the words began to pour out. "Wait! I don't know the inside man, but I can tell you other stuff. After the attack, we brought in an outsider, a freelance bounty hunter, a big croaker named Scar." "Good," Saren said, releasing his hold on the uninjured digit. "Keep going." "Something went wrong at Sidon. Someone survived the attack. A loose end. Scar was hired to hunt her down. A human. She's on Elysium. I don't know her name!" "What else? Why were you hired to attack the base?" "I don't know," Grotto whispered fearfully. "We weren't given any details. The money man was afraid someone would talk. He didn't want the specters to find out." Saren broke 2 more of his fingers just to be sure. "Please!" "Ah!" The Batarian sobbed once he stopped screaming. "It's not me, what? There was a meeting at the warehouse in Scar, and the man who hired us talked to someone who was there." The Turian wasn't surprised his victim was offering up someone else. It was a common reaction in most subjects. Typically, it was a sign the interrogation was nearing an end. Once the subject realized they were running out of useful information to surrender, betraying their allies became their only chance of avoiding further torture. "Where can I find someone from the warehouse?" the Spectre demanded. I don't know," Grotto admitted, his voice trembling. "They're with the money man. He hired them on as his personal bodyguards." "Guess I'm stuck with you then," Saren replied. "That's all I know," the Batarian protested weakly, his voice completely devoid of guile, subterfuge, or hope. "Even if you break every bone in my body, I can't tell you anything else." "We'll see," Saren promised. It was a long night for Saren. The Batarian went into shock and passed out 3 more times during the interrogation. Each time it happened, Saren would have to sit down and wait for him to regain consciousness. There was no point in torturing an unresponsive subject. In the end, it turned out Grotto had been telling the truth. Saren didn't get anything more out of him. He suspected as much, but he had needed to be absolutely sure. There was too much at stake. Someone had hired the Blue Suns. Someone with enough wealth and power to secure their exclusive loyalty. Someone who had taken extra precautions to make sure the Spectres wouldn't find out what was going on. Saren needed to know who had ordered the attack on Sedone, and why. Billions of lives could be at stake, and he was more than willing to torture a single merc for hours on end if there was even the smallest chance he could learn something that might help him break the case. Not that there weren't consequences to his actions. The soundproof room had amplified the piercing shrieks and keening wails of his victim. The screams had physically hurt Saren's ears, and now he had a pounding headache. "Next time," he thought as he rubbed his temples, "I'll bring earplugs." He had lifted the Batarian up onto the bed partway through the interrogation. It was easier to work on him there than to constantly bend down and to reach him on the floor. Now Grotto was just lying motionless on his back, breathing softly in a deep sleep brought on by utter mental and physical exhaustion. There wasn't much to go on, but Saren had a solid lead to follow. He knew Scar by reputation, and he knew the bounty hunter was headed to Elysium. It shouldn't be hard to pick up his trail there. First, though, he had to clean up this mess. Arresting Grotto wasn't an option. It would draw attention and alert whoever hired the Blue Suns that a Spectre was on the case. It was easier and safer to just dispose of the body. Saren gently placed a hand on either side of the Batarian's head, then gave a savage twist at an awkward angle, breaking his elongated neck. A quick and painless death. After all, he wasn't a monster.
Chapter 11. Anderson disembarked on Elysium with the 300 other passengers who had booked a seat on the public transport shuttle from the Citadel. The landing port teemed with people. The densely packed crowd was a mix of every known species in the galaxy, some arriving, some leaving, most waiting in long, winding lines to clear customs and border stations. Security had always been tight on Elysium, but with the attack on the nearby Sedone base, things had been elevated to a level Anderson had never seen before. Not that he disapproved. Ideally, located near the nexus of several primary-secondary relays, Elysium was a major hub for travel and commerce that the Alliance could not afford to expose to possible terrorist attacks. The colony was only 5 years old, but already it was one of the busiest trade ports in the Verge. The population had exploded, recently passing 1 million, if you include all the various and varied resident aliens who accounted for nearly half the total inhabitants. Unfortunately, that also meant a disproportionately high number of visitors to Elysium were non-human and subject to heightened screening procedures. The extra security made arrivals and departures a long and cumbersome experience. For most travelers, even humans were subjected to major delays. The staff taken away to help process the alien visitors meant fewer people left behind to deal with the Alliance citizens. Fortunately for Anderson, his military ID gave him the luxury of bypassing the long lines. The guard at the Alliance station scanned his thumbprint and studied his identification for a few seconds before saluting and waving him through. Officially, Anderson wasn't here in any authorized capacity. He was just an Alliance Marine taking shore leave, a believable enough cover story to avoid drawing any unwanted attention and hide the true purpose of his visit. John Grissom was Kaylee Sanders' father. It was pretty obvious they were estranged, but there was still a good chance Grissom knew something that could help Anderson's investigation. Sedone was only a few hours away from Elysium. There were records of Sanders booking a passage here when she went UA, and even though it looked like Grissom hadn't communicated with his daughter in at least 10 years, it was public knowledge that the Alliance's most recognizable soldier had taken early retirement and become a recluse on humanity's largest colony in the Verge. Anderson still couldn't wrap his head around the idea that Sanders was a traitor. The pieces just didn't add up, but he knew she was involved somehow. Her sudden disappearance had to be more than coincidence. Maybe she had gotten in over her head and panicked when things got out of control. He could imagine her arriving on Elysium, scared, alone, not knowing who to trust. Strange or not, her father was the most likely person she'd turn to for help. After checking his gear at the hotel, Anderson rented a car and drove out to the isolated estates on the outskirts of the city. It took him a while to find Grissom's house. The address in the area was so inconspicuous as to be almost hidden. It was obvious the people who lived out here valued their privacy. Exiting the vehicle, he began the long walk across the grounds of the estate toward the surprisingly small domicile located as far back from the road as possible. Anderson didn't understand Grissom's desire to withdraw from the public eye. He respected the man and his reputation, but he couldn't imagine any way to justify simply walking away like he did. A soldier didn't turn his back on the Alliance like that. "You're not here to pass judgment," he reminded himself as he reached the door. He rang the bell and waited, involuntarily standing at attention. "You're just here to find Kaylee Sanders." It took several minutes before he heard someone coming on the other side, grumbling as he approached. A moment later, the door opened, revealing Rear Admiral John Grissom in all his glory. The salute Anderson had been on the verge of snapping off by way of greeting died at his hip. The man before him wore nothing but a tattered housecoat and dirty boxers. His hair was long and uncombed, and his face was partially hidden behind a 3-day stubble of gray and black hairs. His eyes were hard and bitter, and his face seemed frozen in a scowl. "What do you want?" he demanded. "Sir," Anderson replied, "my name is Lieutenant Commander David Grissom cut him off. "I know who you are. We met back at Arcturus." "That's right, sir," Anderson acknowledged, feeling a faint surge of pride at being recognized. "Before the first contact war, I'm surprised you remember." "I'm retired, not senile." Despite the joke, there was nothing humorous in Grissom's tone. There was an awkward pause as Anderson tried to reconcile his memories of the iconic figure of Grissom's past, with the disheveled grouch now standing in front of him. It was Grissom who filled the silence. Look, kid, I'm retired, so go back and tell the brass that I'm not going to do any interviews or speeches or appearances just because one of our military bases got attacked. I'm done with that crap. Anderson pounced, convinced the other man had already slipped up. How do you know Sedone was attacked? Grissom glared at him like he was a fool. It's all over the damn news vids. That's not why I'm here, Anderson said, trying to hide his embarrassment. Can we talk inside? No. Please, sir, it's a matter I'd rather not discuss out here in public. Grissom held his ground, blocking the door so Anderson couldn't enter. The lieutenant realized tact and diplomacy weren't going to be any use here. Time to be blunt. Tell me about Kaylee Sanders, sir. Who? The old man was good. Anderson had been hoping to see some reaction at the name of his long-lost daughter, his own flesh and blood. But Grissom hadn't even flinched. Kaylee Sanders, Anderson repeated, his voice becoming noticeably louder, like it was unlikely anyone would hear him. The neighbors were too far away, but he had to do something to get inside that door. Your daughter, the soldier who went UA from Sedone mere hours before it was attacked, the woman we're looking at as a traitor to the Alliance. Grissom's scowl became a grimace of pure hatred. Shut up and get your ass in here, he muttered, stepping inside. Once inside, Anderson followed his reluctant host into the small living room. Grissom settled into one of the 3 padded chairs, but the lieutenant remained standing, waiting for an invitation to do the same. After several seconds, he realized the invitation wasn't forthcoming, and he took a seat on his own. How'd you find out about Kaylee? Grissom finally asked, speaking as casually as if they were discussing the weather. There are no secrets in this day and age, Anderson replied. We know she was last seen here on Elysium. I need to know if she came to talk to you. I haven't spoken to my daughter since before she was a teenager, Grissom replied. Her mother didn't think much of me as a husband or a father, and I couldn't really argue with her. I figured the best thing was to just let her get their lives. Hey, Grissom suddenly recalled. Last time we met, you said you were engaged. A girl waiting for you back on Earth, right? You must be married by now. Congratulations. He was trying to throw Anderson off balance. Grissom knew damn well how hard it was for an Alliance soldier to make a marriage work. His innocent question was meant to rattle his guest. He may have looked like a harmless, burned-out old man, but there was still plenty of fight left in him. Anderson wasn't about to rise to the bait. Sir, I need your help. Your daughter's suspected of being a traitor to the Alliance. Doesn't that mean anything to you? Why should it? He shot back. I barely know her. I found out you two were related. Eventually, somebody else is going to make that connection too. What? You think I'm worried about my reputation? He scoffed. You think I'm going to help you because I don't want people to know the great Admiral Grissom had an illegitimate daughter who's accused of treason? Ha! Ha ha ha. You're the ones who care about crap like that. I really couldn't give a damn. That's not what I meant, sir, Anderson replied, refusing to be provoked. I tracked Kaylee here, to you. That means someone else can track her here, too. I came to you because I want to help your daughter, but the next person who comes after her, and we both know there will be others, might be looking to harm her. Grissom leaned forward slowly and placed his head in his hands, considering Anderson's words. Several long moments went before he sat up straight again. His eyes were moist with tears. She's not a traitor, he whispered. She didn't have anything to do with this. I believe you, sir, Anderson said, his voice sincere and sympathetic, but not many others will. That's why I need to find her, before something happens to her. Grissom didn't say anything, but simply sat there and chewing on his lower lip. I won't let anything bad happen to her, Anderson reassured him. I give you my word on it. She came here, Grissom finally admitted, taking a deep breath. She said she was in trouble, something to do with Sidon. I didn't ask her any of the details. I guess I was afraid of what she might tell me. He leaned forward and clasped his head in his hands again. I was never there for her when she was growing up, he mumbled, sounding as if he was on the verge of tears. I couldn't turn away now. I owed her. I understand, Admiral, Anderson said, reaching forward to place a comforting hand on Grissom's shoulder. But you have to tell me where she went. Grissom looked up at him, his expression naked and vulnerable. I gave her the name of a freighter captain down at the ports. Erhing, captain of the Gossamer. He helps people who want to disappear. She left last night. Where was she going? I didn't ask. Erhing takes care of all the details. You need to talk to him. Where is he? The Gossamer left this morning on a trade run out near the terminus systems. He won't be back for weeks. We don't have weeks, sir. Grissom stood up, his posture a little straighter than it had been when Anderson first arrived, as if his muscles were trying to remember what it was like to stand proudly at attention. Then I guess you'll just have to get your patrols out there and find him. Soldier, he's the only one who can lead you to my daughter. Anderson jumped crisply to his feet. Don't worry, Admiral. I won't let anything happen to her. He started to salute, but Grissom turned his head away. Don't, he muttered, ashamed. I don't deserve that anymore. Not anymore. Anderson extended his hand instead. The older man hesitated a moment, then reached out and clasped it in a surprisingly firm grip. You're a better man than I ever was, Anderson. The Alliance is lucky to have you. The lieutenant didn't know what to say, so he only nodded. Grissom took him firmly by the elbow and led him out of the living room to the front door. Remember your promise, he said as his parting words. Don't let anything happen to my daughter. Grissom watched the lieutenant leaving his home on the vid screen for the security camera over his door, only turning away when the young man got into his vehicle and sped off. Then he made his way slowly to the back of the house and knocked once on the closed door of his bedroom. A second later, Kaylee opened it and asked, Who was it? Some Alliance snoop who figured out we were related. I sent him on a wild goose chase. He'll spend the next 2 weeks out near the terminus systems chasing down an old friend of mine. Are you sure he bought it? Kaylee asked. I gave him exactly what he wanted, Grissom said, with a cynical smile. The chance to help an old, broken-down hero. Remember something of who he used to be. But he's not the one we have to worry about, Grissom continued. Things won't get tough until we run into someone involved in the attack on Sidon. Kaylee reached out and grabbed his hand, pressing it firmly between her own palms. Thank you, she said, staring up into her father's eyes. I mean it. He nodded and shifted uncomfortably until she released her grip. We'll wait a few more days, he said, turning away and leaving her to the privacy of her room. Then we'll figure out some way to get you off this planet. A large, dark shadow crept quickly and quietly across the moonlit grounds of Grissom's estate, making its way toward the home. Scar could move silently if he had to, even in full body armor. It slowed him down, but he usually relied on strength rather than speed anyway. There were no lights on inside the small house of the man Scar knew to be the father of his target. He'd been surprised when his Batarian information broker had come up with the name of an Alliance hero, but it didn't really change the job. It just meant there'd be more fallout when he was done. The Krogan didn't know if Kaylee Sanders was inside, but even if she wasn't, her father probably knew how to find her. Scar was confident he could make the human talk, as long as he didn't accidentally kill him first. That's why he was traveling light, armored only with a pistol and his favorite knife. He paused outside the only door, listening for signs of life. From his belt, he pulled out the Omni tool, using it to hack in and disable the security system and override the electronic lock. He slid the Omni tool back into his belt, exchanging it for his pistol, and pushed the door open. His eyes still adjusting to the darkness, he put one foot across the threshold. The shotgun blast took him square in the chest. There was a blue flash as the reflexive system of kinetic barrier fields reacted to the impact, deflecting most of the rounds harmlessly away. A few tore through the kinetic barriers only to ricochet off the ablative plates of his body armor, or bury themselves into the thick padding underlay. A handful penetrated every layer of protection and tore into his flesh beneath. The force of the blast lifted the Krogan off his feet, knocking the pistol from his grip and hurling him back out the door to land heavily on the ground. Grissom jumped up from the chair where he had been holding a nightly vigil ever since Kaylee had arrived and raised the gun for another shot. He'd recognized the blue flash as the intruder's kinetic barriers that absorbed most of the initial blow, but the point-blank hit would have drained the shields, and one more good shot should have finished the job. Lying on his back, Scar yanked the knife from his belt and flung it end over end at his attacker. The blade sank deep into the muscle of Grissom's left bicep as he squeezed the shotgun's trigger again, knocking him back and throwing off his aim. Instead of blowing away the Krogan's head, he left a scorching hole in the ground just beside him. The shotgun's barrel slipped from Grissom's suddenly nerveless hand. Scar was on his feet and back inside the house before the old man could use his one good arm to bring the weapon to bear again. Bellowing in anger, the Krogan slapped the gun away with one massive fist, sending it skittering into the living room. He grabbed the human and flung him against the wall hard enough to crack the plaster. The blade slipped from Grissom's arm as he slumped down on the floor, all the air knocked out of his lungs. The alien loomed above him, turning its head slightly so it could fix on one of its cold, reptilian eyes on him. Grissom was no coward, but he felt fear grip his heart as he stared up into the dead, black pupil. Then he heard a loud crack, 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 the familiar retort of an Alliance Hane Kadar P-1525, and the Krogan staggered away. He'd been shot 3 times in the heavy hump of his muscle and bone on his back, but he was still standing. Lieutenant Anderson stood in the doorway, pistol drawn. He came into the room firing the pistol a half-dozen more times as the Krogan turned to face him. He aimed low, looking to take out the legs. One of his shots found the exposed joint at the knee, where the hard plates of body armor were connected by a flexible but vulnerable padded mesh. Roaring in rage and agony, the Krogan crashed to the ground, clutching at his wounded joint. "One move, and the next shot goes right between your eyes," Anderson warned, taking a bead on the bony ridge running along the top of the Krogan's skull. Grissom was impressed. It wasn't easy to take a human in full body armor down with a pistol, never mind a Krogan. "I'm glad to see you here," he managed to gasp once the wind returned to his lungs. "You didn't honestly expect me to be fooled by that little performance you gave the other day," Anderson replied. never taking his eyes off or his weapon off the Krogan in the corner. "I've been watching this place ever since I walked out on your door." "You didn't honestly expect me to be fooled by that little performance you gave the other day," Anderson replied, never taking his eyes or his weapon off the Krogan in the corner. "I've been watching this place ever since I walked out your door." Grissom struggled to his feet, his left arm still dangling uselessly, his right pressed against his heavily bleeding wound. A moan of pain escaped his lips. "Your friend is hurt," the Krogan growled. Anderson wasn't distracted even for an instant. "He's tough. He'll live." The Krogan was bleeding from the shot to his knee. The armor on his chest was peppered with small holes, the padding beneath scorched and burned. Dark blood oozed from 3 of them. Anderson guessed that at least one of the shots to the back had penetrated deep enough to do some damage as well. But he'd seen Krogan take a hell of a lot more punishment than this and keep coming. The alien on the ground was a wounded beast, angry, desperate, and unpredictable. He was panting, though whether from pain, exertion, or pure rage it was hard to say. His scarred, brutish face was a mask of intense concentration. His muscles were tensed as if he was gathering himself to make a move. But if he tried anything, Anderson would shoot him in the head from inside of 3 meters. Even a Krogan couldn't survive that. He heard a door open and footsteps come running down the hall. "Oh God, you're hurt," a woman screamed. Anderson wasn't stupid enough to turn his head, but for a split second his eyes glanced in the direction of her voice. And that was all the time the Krogan needed. He lashed out with a fist, sending a shockwave of rolling energy rumbling across the room. Anderson had never been hit with a biotic attack before, and he hadn't expected one from a Krogan. In the split second it took him to realize what was happening, he had been swept up in the vortex and thrown all the way into the living room, where he crashed into the ground. It felt like being in an artificial gravity chamber when somebody switched the polarity in an instant. Inescapable and irresistible force. He couldn't recover in time to grab his pistol from where it had fallen, nor could he reach the shotgun laying only a few feet away. Somehow the Krogan, despite his injuries, was already back on his feet and nearly on top of him, swinging his fist with enough power to cave in Anderson's skull. He ducked and slipped to the side, avoiding the punch. The follow-through landed square on the living room table. It disintegrated into splinters at the impact. Everything had descended into chaos. Grissom was shouting at Kaylee to run. She was screaming at Anderson to grab one of the guns. The Krogan was roaring in anger, flailing about the room, flinging and tossing the furniture like it was made of balsa wood, while Anderson dodged and scrambled for his life, only able to avoid the killing blows because his opponent was still hobbled by his wounded knee. From the corner of his eye, he saw Kaylee rush forward into the fray, lunging in a desperate bid to get the shotgun. The Krogan saw her too, and wheeled on the young woman. He would have killed her right then if another bullet hadn't ripped through a seam in his armor at his hip, making him stagger off balance and misdirecting his blow. Anderson whipped his head around to see a Turian standing in the door, where he had been mere minutes before, firing a pistol at the Krogan. The lieutenant had no idea who he was or why he was here. He was just glad they had somebody else on their side. Most of the shots ricocheted off the Krogan's armor as the beast ducked down and tried to cover his head, the only exposed part of his body. He glanced back at the Turian, then leaped through the living room window, smashing through the plate glass. The Krogan landed on his shoulder on the grass outside and rolled to his feet in one smooth motion. He took off in a lumbering run, his gait awkward because of his injured leg, but moving far faster than Anderson would have believed possible for a creature of his size. The Turian stepped outside and fired a few shots into the darkness, then turned and came back into the house. Aren't you going after him? Grissom asked, their unknown ally. He was still on the ground, but he'd used the belt of his bathrobe to tie a tourniquet around his upper arm, stemming the flow of blood from his wounded bicep. Not armed only with this, the Turian responded, holding up his pistol. Besides, only a fool faces a Krogan biotic alone. I think what Admiral Grissom actually meant to say, Anderson said. No. Not armed only with this, the Turian responded, holding up his pistol. Besides, only a fool faces a Krogan biotic alone. I think what the Admiral Grissom actually meant to say, Anderson said, coming over and extending his hand, was thank you for saving us. The Turian stared down at the offered hand, but made no effort to extend his own. Embarrassed, the lieutenant pulled his hand back. I know why he's here, Grissom said, through teeth gritted against the pain, nodding his head in Anderson's direction. What's your story? I've been tailing Scar for 2 days, the Turian replied, waiting for him to make a move. Tailing him? Kaylee asked as she came over to check on her father's wound. What for? Who are you? My name is Saren. I'm a Spectre, and I want some answers. And that was chapter 11. Awesome. Thank you guys so much for watching. Subscribe for more coming up here. We're going to be finishing up this book. We're going to start doing some comics. I'm taking pictures of them right now so I can overlay behind me and, not make this as big as it is now. But we're going to do that, and so I'll read through it and you can see the comics as we go. This is just a novel, so there's no pictures for you. But, thank you for your patience. It's been a rough ride here this summer, so I'm just trying to get back into the things that I was doing, and that includes reading these books. And this is all Mass Effect lore, and we need it all. You need it all to understand what's going on. So we pick up again with chapter 12, and then in the next episode, 12 and 13 actually we'll do, and then we'll also be starting Mass Effect 2 here soon. So look out for all that stuff. So it's just a huge lore dump. That's all we're doing here, reading for fun. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and leave a like down below and subscribe to the channel so that when these do come out you can go see it. And then up here we got the playlist to this book, and then over there we got the playlist for the Mass Effect series that we're doing. So please check those out. I also got other videos here, and the review will be coming soon for Mass Effect from me. Huge Mass Effect fan, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. See you next time in Mass Effect Revelation.